Hi, I'm Emily. I'll be your storyteller today. Many of you use these stories to fall asleep. So before we begin, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. Also, where are you watching from, and what time is it there? Now get comfortable. Close your eyes and let the sound of the rain guide you into the story. The day I moved into the house on Ashwood Lane, the clouds were already gathering like silent spectators. The air smelled of damp soil and old pine, and the wind carried a chill that didn't quite belong to autumn. The cottage sat quietly at the edge of a wooded hill, far from the town's center, with peeling white paint and a porch that creaked under its own memories. I told myself I needed the solitude, a place to reset, to write, to breathe. The real estate agent called it, charmingly, remote. But even in daylight, the house felt like it had secrets, and that night, it rained. It wasn't the kind of soft rain that lulls you to sleep. It started as a steady patter on the roof, then grew heavier, tapping against the windows like impatient fingers. I was still unpacking when the power flickered, then returned, as if the house were testing my nerves. The sound of the wind brushing through the trees outside created a strange whispering effect, almost like voices caught between branches. I ignored it, poured myself a glass of wine, and curled up on the couch listening to the storm. That's when I heard it. A different sound. Footsteps on the porch. It was faint, almost disguised by the rhythm of the rain, but definitely there. 2 slow, deliberate steps, then silence. I sat up, every muscle tight with alertness. The porch had no cover. Anyone out there would be soaking wet. I walked to the front window, hesitated, then gently moved the curtain aside. The porch was empty. The steps must have been in my head. I told myself that. Still, I double-checked the locks on all doors and windows before going to bed. I didn't sleep well. Thunder rolled through the hills, and the roof creaked with each gust of wind. But what kept me awake wasn't the weather. It was the feeling that something was watching. I've lived alone before, in cities far louder than this place, but never had I felt so observed. At some point I drifted into a restless sleep, waking up just after dawn to find the rain had stopped. Everything was quiet again. The air thick with the smell of wet leaves and something else I couldn't quite place, like metal and soil. Stepping outside onto the porch, I felt a chill race up my arms. The wood was slick beneath my feet. As I turned to go back inside, I saw them. Muddy footprints. They started at the steps and ended just outside the front door, too large to be mine, too crisp to be from last night. No sign of where they went next. I stood frozen, heart hammering in my chest, staring at those prints as the wind carried the scent of rain away. I told myself it must have been a delivery person, but no one should have been out here. Not in that storm. Not at night. Spent the morning trying to rationalize. Maybe the footprints belonged to a utility worker or a neighbor checking in, though no one had introduced themselves yet. I opened the mailbox out front, empty. No packages, no notes. Nothing to suggest anyone had stopped by. Still, the image of those prints stuck with me. How clean they were. How they ended just at my door like the person had stood there, waiting. I tried to shake it off, but I found myself looking over my shoulder constantly, expecting to see someone lingering, just out of sight. The following day was quiet. No rain, no wind, only the occasional rustle of leaves falling from the trees. I worked on organizing the study and finally unpacked my boxes of books. I lit a candle in the living room to soften the atmosphere. It helped a little, but I couldn't forget how different the house had felt during the rain, like it came alive somehow. I laughed at myself for even thinking it. Maybe it was just the storm amplifying normal sounds. Old houses creak, floorboards settle. That's all it was. Still, I avoided the porch. That night, the rain returned, soft at first. I had made tea, curled up again on the couch, and put on some music, low enough to hear the rain but loud enough to cover anything unexpected. But then I noticed something strange. The wind chimes I had unpacked but never hung were ringing. I froze. I had left them inside the sunroom, resting on a chair. Slowly, I walked down the hall, my bare feet silent against the wooden floor. As I neared the sunroom door, the chimes stopped. Dead silence. I opened the door. The wind chimes were still on the chair, unmoved. No open windows, no breeze. Nothing that could have caused the sound. I stared at them for a long moment, heart pounding, trying to decide if I had imagined it. I returned to the living room, trying to resume my night, but the warmth of the tea was gone, and the music felt distant, like it belonged to another room, another person. Something in the air had shifted. The rain now hit the windows harder, more rhythmically, like it was keeping time with a pulse. Around midnight, I turned off the lights and went to bed. I left the hallway lamp on, just in case. I lay under the covers, eyes on the ceiling, listening. The house was too quiet. Even the rain seemed to fade. I was just starting to drift off when I heard it again. Those same footsteps on the porch. Slow, measured. This time, I didn't get up. I pulled the blanket tighter and held my breath. The steps stopped just outside the bedroom wall. Then, a knock. Not at the door, at the window beside my bed. The knock was soft but deliberate. 1, 2, pause, then another. I stared at the curtain, afraid to move, afraid that if I looked, I would see something I couldn't unsee. My mind scrambled for logic. Maybe a tree branch? No, there were no trees close enough. Maybe an animal? No animal knocks like that. I clutched the sheets and stayed frozen, my breathing shallow, straining to hear any other sound. For a long moment, there was nothing. Then, faintly, I heard what sounded like breathing. It came from just beyond the glass. Wet, slow, ragged, breathing. I reached for my phone on the nightstand, but my fingers trembled so badly I nearly dropped it. No signal. Of course not. The storm had probably knocked out the tower. I considered turning on the bedroom light, but something told me not to. It felt like if I did, I'd be seen. I slid slowly down beneath the blankets, praying whoever or whatever was out there would go away. The breathing continued for several more minutes before fading into silence. When I finally dared to peek from under the covers, the window was dark, no movement, no sound but the wind and the ever-present rain. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. At some point, the storm weakened, and with it, the dread seemed to lift slightly, like fog burned off by morning light. But it never truly left. I kept staring at the window until the gray light of dawn began to push through the curtains. Only then did I sit up and walk slowly over to the glass, holding my breath as I pulled the curtain back. There were no footprints, No handprints. Just rainwater running down the pane and a faint smudge near the bottom corner, like something had leaned close enough to fog the glass. I told myself it could have been condensation, but I knew better. I didn't even open the window. I just closed the curtain again, locked the bedroom door out of habit, and went to make coffee with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. The rain had stopped. The house felt normal again. But my heart hadn't caught up. Later that day, I walked down the hill to the main road, hoping some movement or fresh air might help. I passed 1 or 2 houses, most with their blinds shut, tight. No one was out, even though the sun had returned. It felt like the neighborhood was waiting, holding its breath. As I passed an old white mailbox on the edge of someone's lawn, I noticed something scratched into the wood post. 4 words. They come when it rains. I stared at it, unsure if it had always been there. A chill crept up my spine that had nothing to do with the wind. I returned home just before dusk, the clouds already gathering once again. The forecast had promised more rain tonight, and with it, my anxiety grew. I checked every door, every window, every lock. I even placed a chair beneath the doorknob of my bedroom for good measure. I wasn't taking chances. Still, as night fell, and the first drops began tapping against the roof, I felt that same presence settle around the house, like something waking up just beneath the surface, stirred by the rain. I tried to distract myself. Books, podcasts, even background noise. On the TV, but nothing held my attention. My eyes kept drifting to the windows, the front door, the porch. I couldn't help but listen for it. The sound of footsteps. But what unnerved me most wasn't hearing them. It was not hearing them. Silence can be cruel, especially when your fear has learned its rhythm. And tonight, the silence stretched for hours, heavy and patient. Around midnight, I heard it again. Just a single creak on the porch. Not a step, not a knock. Just a quiet reminder that I wasn't alone. I stayed in the hallway this time, lights off, peeking from the shadows. Through the small gap in the curtain, I saw a dark silhouette standing motionless on the far edge of the porch. No umbrella, no movement. Just watching. I couldn't see a face. I didn't want to. I closed the curtain with shaking fingers and backed away slowly. The rest of the night passed in fragments. I must have dozed off at some point on the floor of my hallway, wrapped in a blanket, a flashlight in one hand. The rain continued until just before sunrise, and with it, the oppressive feeling faded again. Like a switch being turned off. I stood up on sore legs and opened the front door cautiously. Nothing. No footprints this time. But the doormat was soaked and slightly moved, as if someone had stood there, or wiped their feet before entering. That morning, I made a decision. I would start documenting everything. The sounds, the footprints, the shadows, especially when it rained. I didn't know what I was dealing with yet, but something had found me here. Something that came only with the storm, and I had a feeling it was just the beginning. The following days were dry, and with the sun came a false sense of calm. I told myself maybe it had all been stress, isolation, or exhaustion playing tricks on me. The rational part of my mind clung to that explanation like a lifeline. I swept the porch, reorganized some shelves, and even took a walk through the woods behind the house. But the scratch in the mailbox post stayed with me. They come when it rains. It echoed in the back of my mind, louder than any thunder ever could. Still, the house seemed quieter, safer, even. I started sleeping upstairs again, though I left the hallway light on just in case. Every night I checked all the locks, twice. I even bought a new interior bolt for the side entrance, the one that led from the laundry room to the back patio. It had always stuck a little, and I didn't like how easy it felt to force open. After I installed the bolt, I slept a little better. But deep down, I knew I was only buying time. The rain would come again. It returned 5 days later, as I sat, reading in bed. I hadn't checked the forecast. I hadn't wanted to. But I felt it before I heard it. The pressure in the air shifted, and the house grew darker, quieter, as if bracing itself. Then came the first drop. Then a dozen. Then the steady hum of a storm building its rhythm. I turned off the lamp and lay in silence, holding my breath as I listened. I told myself not to expect anything. Not every storm meant something, but some part of me knew. This one did. An hour passed. Nothing happened. No knocks, no footsteps, no silhouette on the porch. I began to relax slightly, even laugh at myself, a little. I decided to go downstairs for a drink, maybe write a note in the journal I'd started. I took the stairs slowly, still listening, still cautious. But nothing was out of place. The house smelled of warm wood and rain. I poured a glass of water in the kitchen, the storm tapping softly at the windows, and felt a strange gratitude that maybe tonight would be quiet. That's when I noticed the door. The back one, the one with the new bolt. It was shut, yes, but the bolt I had locked earlier was now hanging loose, dangling sideways, completely undone. My glass nearly slipped from my hand. I stood frozen, watching the bolt sway gently, as if someone had just released it. My first thought was wind, but the door was shut. No breeze, no draft. Nothing should have moved that lock, and yet it had. I stepped closer, heart pounding in my chest like it was trying to escape. I reached out and touched the bolt. Cold. Not from the storm, but the kind of cold that doesn't belong indoors. I resecured it slowly, trying not to breathe too loud, as if whatever had undone it was still nearby, listening. Then I tested the knob. It was locked. The door hadn't been open, but something had moved that bolt. Something from the inside. I stood there in the dim kitchen light, trying to decide what that meant. I searched the entire house. Every room. Every closet. Even under the beds. I opened kitchen drawers, checked the attic door, tapped the walls like some detective in a haunted movie. Of course, I found nothing. The place was as empty as always. But when I returned to the kitchen, I noticed something else. The window above the sink, which I always kept locked, had a faint smudge on the glass. A partial handprint. Not full, not clear. Just enough to know someone had touched it recently. My skin prickled all over. The rest of the night I stayed on, the living room couch, wrapped in blankets, facing the kitchen. I left all the lights on. The rain continued well past midnight, soft and steady, like it was lulling the house into sleep. But I didn't sleep. Every creak, every distant groan of wood made my heart skip. Around 3 a.m, I heard something else. A soft tap. Not on a window this time, but on the inside wall, from somewhere behind the pantry. One tap. Then silence. The sound didn't come again, but I couldn't ignore it. The pantry backed against a narrow hallway that led to the cellar, a place I had barely visited since moving in. The thought of going down there in the dark while it rained outside made my stomach turn. I waited until morning. At first light, I opened the pantry door and pressed my ear to the wall. Nothing. I moved the shelves aside and ran my fingers along the wood. Just like before, solid, unmoving. But the fear didn't leave. It stayed, settled. I needed answers. I decided to speak to someone, anyone, who had lived in the area long enough to know about this house. I walked into town through light drizzle and stopped by the small cafe near the church. An older woman behind the counter asked if I was the one who'd moved into the White House on Ashwood Lane. I nodded. Her smile faltered for a second, just barely, before she poured my coffee. "Storm season's early this year," she said. "You be careful in that place. Doors don't always stay shut when it rains." Her words stayed with me long after I left the cafe. She hadn't said them with fear or even concern, just a kind of quiet resignation, like someone who had accepted the strange way things worked around here. I wanted to ask her more, but something in her eyes warned me not to. Back home, the sky was already darkening again. The storm hadn't truly left. It had only taken a breath. That afternoon, I rechecked every window, every latch, every bolt. I even placed a small bell on the back doorknob, hoping that if it moved, I'd hear it. When night fell, the rain returned, gentle at first, then steady, then almost comforting. I stayed in the living room with the journal open on my lap, documenting every sound, every flicker of movement, every shift in the air. At 10:13 p.m., I heard the bell chime once, a single high-pitched note. I rushed to the kitchen. The door was shut, bolt still in place, but the bell was swinging. I stood and watched it until it stilled. The room was cold, colder than the rest of the house, and the smell of wet wood was stronger than ever. I didn't sleep again that night. I sat in the hallway outside my bedroom, flashlight in one hand, fireplace poker in the other. Around 2 a.m., I heard a door creak open, slow, hesitant, but no footsteps followed. I checked every door in the house. All were shut. None had moved. It was as if the sound came from nowhere, and everywhere at once. I returned to my post and sat in silence until dawn. The storm didn't stop until almost 7. The light came slowly, and with it, the illusion of safety. Later that morning, I discovered something else. The laundry room floor was damp, not in puddles, but in footprints, bare, human, and small, as if a child had walked through in silence. The prints were faint, but unmistakable. I followed them with trembling steps. They began near the back door, looped around the washing machine, and stopped near the cellar door. I stared at the handle for what felt like an hour. I didn't want to open it. I didn't want to see what might be waiting below. But not opening it felt worse. I turned the knob and opened the door. The stairs descended into blackness, the kind that eats light. I stood at the top step, heart hammering, calling softly into the dark. "Hello?" My voice felt small, useless. I flipped the switch on the wall. Nothing. The bulb was out. I reached for my flashlight, hand shaking, and aimed it downward. The beam cut through the dark. Dust hanging in the air, shelves covered in tarps, the smell of mildew and cold stone. But at the very bottom of the steps, something moved, It was slight, barely perceptible, but enough. A flicker of motion in the edge of the flashlight beam. I froze, the light fixed on the spot. Nothing. I didn't move, didn't breathe. My heart was thudding in my ears, loud enough to drown out the rain outside. Then, again, just a shift in the darkness. Like someone adjusting their stance slowly, deliberately. I took one step down, the wooden stair groaning beneath me. The air felt thicker down here, older, like something had been waiting a very long time. Is someone down there? I asked again, my voice barely audible over the pounding in my chest. Silence. But I could still feel it, whatever it was. Not just presence, but attention. Focus. Something that had already seen me long before I had stepped into its space. My flashlight flickered once, then steadied. I tightened my grip. I knew I should turn around and walk away. Close the door. Pretend nothing had ever happened. But I had already gone too far. I couldn't unknow what I'd seen, what I'd felt. I descended slowly, step by agonizing step, until I reached the basement floor. Dust swirled around my feet, and the faint outline of the childlike footprints I'd followed had faded into nothing. I scanned the room. Nothing. No movement, no shadow, no person. But then I noticed something else. In the far corner of the room, tucked behind an old cabinet, was a door I hadn't seen before. Smaller than the others. Narrow, wooden, with no knob, just a latch. It looked out of place, almost like it didn't belong to this house. Or this time. I approached it, hand extended, the air colder with each step. Just as I touched the latch, something heavy shifted above me. A sound like footsteps, but not on the floor above, on the ceiling of the basement, as if someone or something was crawling directly above where I stood. I stepped back quickly, heart racing, pulse thudding in my ears. The sound moved, scraping against wood, slow and deliberate. Then it stopped. I turned off the flashlight, stood in darkness, and waited. Minutes passed. No more footsteps, no voices. Just the endless dripping of water down the cellar walls. I backed toward the stairs without opening the small door. Not tonight. Maybe not ever. I reached the top, closed the door behind me, and locked it tight. As I turned, I noticed something scratched faintly into the wood just above the handle. I hadn't seen it before. 4 words, shallow but unmistakable. Don't open while raining. The next few days passed in silence, though the sky never truly cleared. The clouds hovered low and heavy, like a curtain refusing to lift. I kept the curtains drawn, the basement door blocked, the windows locked tight. I couldn't stop thinking about the carved warning, "Don't open while raining." It echoed through every room like a silent chant. I didn't leave the house. I waited. And of course the rain returned, soft at first, then steady, then hard, drumming against the glass with intent. It was close to 1 a.m. when I awoke to a sound I didn't recognize. Not footsteps, not knocking. Something subtler, like fingers, slowly dragging across a window pane. I sat up in bed, still cloaked in darkness, and listened. The air felt thick, my breath shallow. I crept toward the window without turning on the light. Lightning flickered in the distance, briefly illuminating the room in pale blue. And in that flash, I saw it. A face, pressed against the glass. It was pale, expressionless, motionless, like a mask stretched over something that used to be human. Empty, wide-set eyes, a long face, lips that didn't move, didn't smile, just watched. I didn't scream. I couldn't. My body locked in place, heart hammering so hard it hurt. Then the light faded, and with it, the face vanished. I rushed forward, yanked the curtain aside. Nothing. Only rivulets of rain crawling down the glass like slow tears. But I knew what I'd seen. Something had been there. Something still watching. The next morning, I couldn't shake the image. It lingered behind my eyelids like an afterimage burned into memory. I went for a walk, trying to clear my head, hoping daylight would dispel the fear. As I rounded the corner near the old fence line, I noticed an older man sweeping leaves from the sidewalk. He paused as I approached, his eyes never leaving mine. "You saw it, didn't you?" he asked. Not in suspicion, more like confirmation. Like he already knew the answer. "Excuse me?" I replied, startled. But he didn't say anything else. He simply turned away, walking slowly toward his porch and leaving the broom behind. I stood there a moment, rooted to the spot. I hadn't said a word. How did he know? The way he looked at me, calm, tired, almost regretful, was more terrifying than any face in a window. It meant I wasn't crazy. It meant someone else had seen it too. And that meant whatever it was real. I returned home in a fog, my thoughts tangled and restless. I kept replaying his words in my head. "You saw it, didn't you?" The way he said it, quiet and certain, gnawed at me. I didn't know his name or where he lived exactly, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he had been waiting for someone else to see it. Like it was inevitable. Back inside, I checked the windows again, every single one. I stared through the rain-streaked glass for any trace of movement, but all I saw was the forest. Still, watching back. That night, the rain intensified. It wasn't a storm. There was no wind, no thunder, just a heavy, relentless downpour. The kind that made the house feel smaller, more suffocating. I tried to read, to listen to music, to do anything that would keep me from looking toward the windows. But it was like they were calling me. Each one a dark mirror, each one a promise. I finally gave in, standing near the front window with the curtain just slightly parted. My breath fogged the glass. And then I saw movement. It was faint at first, just a shift of shadows beneath the trees. I leaned in closer, squinting. A figure stood at the edge of the tree line, too far to see clearly, but close enough to know it wasn't an illusion. It didn't move, didn't approach, just stood there, watching. As the rain fell harder, the figure became harder to see, blending with the darkness as if it was made of it. I let the curtain fall shut and stepped away, heart pounding. When I finally looked again, it was gone. I didn't sleep. I sat in the hallway with the lights off, a blanket wrapped around me, and listened. Hours passed. The house groaned. The pipes sighed. The storm whispered at the windows like a stranger asking to be let in. At one point, I thought I heard breathing again, but softer this time, as if it were inside the room with me. I turned on the hallway light and walked the perimeter of the house. Everything looked the same, and yet it wasn't. Something had shifted just beneath the surface. In the morning, I checked the backyard. The grass was soaked, puddles gathered along the stepping stones. But in the mud near the sunroom window, I found them. 2 distinct shoe prints, barely visible, but there, they were small, narrow, not mine. I hadn't stepped in that area in days. The prints faced the window directly, as if someone had stood there for a long time, looking in. I didn't know what disturbed me more, the fact that someone had been standing there, or the way the prints ended. There were no tracks leading away, no signs of a path back to the woods, just 2 perfect, isolated impressions in the mud, as if the person had appeared there and then vanished. I stood over them for a long time, my feet sinking slightly into the damp earth. The air was heavy, the scent of wet moss and old leaves clinging to my clothes. I felt exposed, like eyes were still on me. Back inside, I did what had become routine. Checked the locks, closed the blinds, placed the bell on the back doorknob. I tried to ignore the growing pressure behind my eyes, that low throb of dread that never quite left anymore. I wanted to call someone, to tell a friend, to share even one detail of what I'd seen. But who would believe me? That I was being watched through windows, that something waited in the rain, that I'd seen a face I'll never forget, a face that had no reason to be there. I didn't go out that day. I stayed by the windows, watching. I didn't even realize the rain had returned until it was already falling in sheets. I turned on the hallway light and froze. On the floor just beneath the front window were 3 droplets of water. Not from a leak. There was no leak. The window was locked tight. But something had been there, close enough to let the rain drip from its body onto the floor. I wiped it up with a towel. The fear remained, soaked deeper than the floorboards. At midnight, I heard the chimes. Not the ones in the sunroom. I hadn't moved those since the first night. This sound came from the side of the house, near the kitchen, where I had hung an old brass bell on a hook above the window. It hadn't moved in days. But now it rang. Once. Twice. Then silence. I walked slowly into the kitchen, the flashlight trembling in my hand. I approached the window, pulled back the curtain just a sliver, and there it was. A shadow, standing inches away, unmoving, waiting. I didn't see a face this time, just the vague outline of something tall, slim, and still. But the way it stood, it knew I was there. It didn't flinch, didn't shy away. It simply remained, like a statue carved from rain. I let the curtain fall, took 3 steps back, and didn't breathe for what felt like minutes. The bell rang again. Soft, distant like a warning. I didn't dare look again. I turned off the flashlight, curled up on the couch, and waited for morning to come. I must have fallen asleep at some point. When I opened my eyes, the house was quiet, filled with that strange, sterile calm that follows heavy storms. The rain had stopped. Light filtered weakly through the curtains. I stood, stretching my stiff limbs, and slowly walked toward the kitchen. I didn't know what I expected to find. Wet footprints, a broken latch, maybe even the figure still standing. There, but there was nothing. Only silence. The bell above the window was still, unmoving, almost like it had never rung at all. But something had changed. I saw it as I passed the hallway mirror. A small mark, faint, on my neck. I leaned in closer. It wasn't a scratch or a bruise, more like an imprint, a shape I couldn't immediately place, almost like a fingerprint, but not human. The ridges were longer, uneven, and curved in ways that didn't make sense. I hadn't gone outside. I hadn't let anyone in. So how had it gotten there? I stared at it for a long time, heart thudding in my ears. I wore a scarf that day, even though the weather had cleared. Something about the mark made me feel raw, vulnerable, like it wasn't just on my skin, but inside me somehow. I didn't leave the house. I didn't check the windows. I stayed curled up near the fireplace, trying to write in the journal. But the words wouldn't come. All I could think about were those dark, watching eyes pressed to the glass, and that silent, knowing look in the old man's face. He had seen them too, and he had never warned me. That evening, as the sun began to set behind thickening clouds, I stepped out onto the porch for the first time in days. The air was heavy with moisture, but the ground was dry. I looked toward the woods. No movement. No figures. Still, I felt them. Not with my eyes, but with something deeper, like the weight of a thought you can't unthink. Something had changed. Something had crossed over. And I had let it happen, not by mistake, but by witnessing it. By acknowledging it, I was no longer just being watched. I was being recognized, marked. The rain was coming again. I could smell it, thick in the air. And I knew, with bone-deep certainty, that the face I had seen was only the beginning. There would be more. And next time, they wouldn't wait outside. The storm began earlier than expected. By late afternoon, the sky had turned a deep slate gray, and fat drops were already striking the porch in slow, heavy rhythm. I watched from the living room window, clutching a mug of tea I hadn't sipped. The scent of the storm was different this time, sharper, more metallic, like the air itself was warning me. I had drawn the curtains in every room, checked the doors twice, and set the bell hooks again. But no amount of preparation made me feel safe anymore. Not when the rain started speaking in silence. It was just past 6 when I first saw him. I had peeked through a narrow gap in the curtain, something I told myself I wouldn't do anymore. But habit, or maybe curiosity, betrayed me. At first I thought it was a tree, a tall figure at the edge of the property line, unmoving. Then I saw the umbrella, black, wide, perfectly still despite the wind. The man stood beneath it with unnatural stillness, facing the house. He didn't shift, didn't sway, just stood there. And somehow, even from a distance, I knew. He was looking right at me. I closed the curtain quickly, stepping back, heart racing. My first instinct was to call someone, police, a neighbor, anyone, but my phone had no signal. Again. I walked to the back of the house and checked the windows there. No one. Nothing. Just the endless rain and the dense line of trees. But when I returned to the front window and peeked again, he was still there. Same position, same posture. Still holding that enormous black umbrella like it was part of his body. My stomach twisted. He didn't leave. For hours he remained there. I paced the house, checked the locks over and over. At one point, I opened the journal and tried to write, but my hands were too unsteady. I sat by the fireplace, lights off, hoping that if I didn't move, he'd go away. But every time I looked, even just for a second, he was still there. A tall silhouette in the storm, always watching, never advancing. Like a statue placed by something cruel, meant only for me to see. Then, sometime after midnight, he was gone. I hadn't heard him leave. No footsteps, no shifting gravel, no creak of the porch. Just gone. I stepped outside, despite every bone in my body screaming not to. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, and the cold bit deep into my skin. I scanned the yard, the woods, the road, nothing. But where he had stood, there was a small dark shape on the ground. I approached slowly, breath tight in my chest, and saw what he had left behind. A single black button. I didn't touch the button at first. I just stared at it, watching how the rain pooled around it without disturbing it. It was larger than a normal coat button, almost the size of a coin and perfectly smooth. No thread holes, no scratches, no markings. Just black, polished and cold. I knelt beside it, half expecting it to vanish if I blinked. But it didn't. It was real. A parting gift from something that should never have come so close. Against my better judgment, I picked it up. The moment, my fingers closed around it. I felt a chill run through my arm. It wasn't just wet from the rain. It was cold in a way that felt unnatural, like it had been frozen in a place where warmth didn't exist. I turned it over in my palm again and again, hoping to find something, a clue, an inscription, a trace of what he wanted. But there was nothing, just the weight of it, small but suffocating. I wrapped it in a paper towel and placed it inside, a drawer far from the windows. All that night I couldn't stop thinking about him. The way he had stood so still, the way he never tried to get closer, it was different from the others. The face in the glass, the figure at the tree line, the footprints, those had all wanted something. But the man with the umbrella, he brought something, or warned of it. I began to wonder if he was part of them, or something else entirely. A messenger, or a guard. And if so, what exactly was he guarding me from? The next morning, the sky was clear for the first time in weeks. The ground steamed gently under the sun, and the house creaked in the warmth. Everything looked so normal, it was almost offensive. I opened the drawer where I had placed the button and found it dry, cool, and as black as before. I held it up to the window, looking through it like a lens. Nothing changed. But when I placed it on the table, the wood beneath it seemed darker. Not stained, just shadowed, like it drew light away. That afternoon I returned to the cafe in town, hoping to see the old man again. He wasn't there. No one I spoke to knew. His name. One woman said, "I think he passed away years ago," and laughed awkwardly when I didn't smile. I asked if anyone had ever seen a man with a black umbrella watching houses during storms. Her eyes narrowed. "Don't go asking about things you don't want following you," she said, before turning her back to me. And I knew then I wasn't the first to see him. I walked back home slowly, feeling the sun on my face but unable to feel warmth. The town seemed different now. Smaller, emptier, like it had recoiled from something invisible. The streets were quiet. The houses looked abandoned, even though I knew they weren't. I passed the mailbox again, the one with the words carved into the wood. They had faded slightly, but I could still read them. They come when it rains. I ran my fingers over the letters, wondering how long ago someone had left that warning, and if anyone else had listened. That night, I couldn't sleep. I left the bedroom light on and sat at the desk, the button lying in front of me. I thought about throwing it away, burying it, even burning it. But something told me that wouldn't help, that it would find its way back. I placed it on a sheet of white paper and traced its outline with a pencil. As I did, I noticed something odd. The light in the room seemed dimmer around it, like it absorbed more than just space. I turned off the lamp and stared at it in the dark. It gleamed faintly. Just a flicker, barely there. A pulse of reflection that didn't match the lighting in the room. I leaned in closer, watching it with growing unease. It wasn't glowing, not exactly. It was reacting, responding. I stood abruptly and walked away, heart racing. The air in the room felt heavier than before, pressing against my chest like a hand. I didn't go back in for hours. When I did, the button was gone. The paper still lay on the desk, with the circle I had drawn, but the object itself had vanished. I searched the house top to bottom, every drawer, every floorboard, every pocket. I even checked outside. Nothing. I sat down on the stairs and tried to breathe through the rising panic. Then I saw it, just beyond the front window, resting at the edge of the porch in the rain. The button. Back outside, back where I had found it. I didn't open the door. I didn't go near it. I just sat there, watching through the glass as the rain pooled around it again. It didn't move, but it didn't have to. Later that night, the phone rang. A voice I didn't recognize whispered my name. Just once. Then silence. I stayed frozen, the receiver in my hand, listening to the emptiness. When I finally hung up, I walked to the front door and looked outside. The button was gone. The porch was dry. But the umbrella was there, leaned gently against the railing, as if left behind by someone who had finally decided to come closer. I didn't touch the umbrella. I couldn't. I stood behind the door, staring at it through the peephole. It hadn't been there minutes ago. The street was still empty, the rain steady but quiet. Yet there it was, propped upright against the wooden railing like someone had just stepped inside for a moment and would be back. I backed away slowly, refusing to open the door, my fingers twitching with the urge to bolt it shut. But a bolt wouldn't stop something that didn't need doors. That night, I didn't sleep. In the bedroom, I laid blankets on the floor of the hallway and curled up near the center of the house, away from all windows. I kept a lamp on, the soft hum of the bulb the only sound I trusted. I listened for footsteps, for creaks, for bells. But the house was still, too still. It felt like it was holding its breath with me. Hours passed in slow fragments, and my eyes burned from staying open too long. Every time I blinked, I saw that umbrella, tall, black, waiting. Sometime after 3 a.m., I heard the front doorknob turn. Not rattle, not jiggle. Turn. Smoothly, like someone with the key. I held my breath, every muscle tensed. The knob turned halfway, then stopped. I rose quietly and crept toward the door, heart pounding against my ribs like a fist. Through the peephole there was nothing, just the umbrella, still upright, still waiting. The knob never moved again, but I stayed there for over an hour, just in case. By morning, the umbrella was gone. No footprints, no wet marks, no button. Just the memory of its presence burned into the wood grain of the porch. I didn't know if he'd be back, but I knew now, without question, that this wasn't random. It wasn't just my house. It was me. Whatever they were, whatever this was, it had chosen me, marked me, and it was getting bolder. The rain came, again that evening. Soft, steady. I sat at the window, watching the shadows lengthen across the yard. I didn't need to look for movement this time. I could feel it, in the corners, in the spaces between breaths. They were coming closer, and next time I feared they wouldn't just watch. The sound came just after midnight. It was subtle at first, like water falling from a faucet not completely shut. But every few seconds, there was a rhythm to it. Drip, step, drip, step. I sat upright in bed, pulse hammering. The rain had started, again hours earlier, and by now it was steady, constant. I listened closely, unsure if the sound was inside my head or inside the house. Then I heard it again, closer this time. Slow, deliberate. Footsteps, wet ones, moving across the floor, downstairs. I stayed completely still, eyes fixed on the ceiling. There was no creaking wood, no opening door, just that drip, step, drip, step sound, as if someone soaking wet was walking barefoot on the wooden floor. I slid out of bed and held my breath, trying to pinpoint the location. It wasn't coming from the porch. It wasn't outside. It was inside the house. I tiptoed to the bedroom door, cracked it just slightly, and listened. The sound was coming from the hallway near the stairs. I grabbed the flashlight from my nightstand and flicked it on. The narrow beam cut through the dark like a knife through fog. Slowly, I opened the door wider and stepped into the hall. The sound had stopped. I moved silently, inch by inch, down the stairs, avoiding the step that creaked. The house smelled damp, earthy, like the forest had somehow crept indoors. I reached the bottom step and scanned the living room. Empty. But on the floor, leading from the front door toward the kitchen, were prints. Wet footprints, bare, small, leading away from the door. I moved toward them, crouching to look closer. The size of the prints reminded me of a child's, but they weren't perfectly shaped. The toes were long, uneven, as if whatever left them didn't quite belong to any human form. My breath caught in my throat. The trail curved around the dining room table and vanished into the hallway. I followed, careful not to step in them. The floorboards were slick with moisture, though the windows were shut and sealed. As I reached the hallway, I heard it again. Dripping water. Not from the ceiling, not from the pipes. From behind me. I spun around, light shaking in my hand, but nothing was there. No sound. No movement. Just that lingering, suffocating sense of being watched. I turned slowly, scanning every shadow. The prints had disappeared. I was alone again. Or at least that's what the house wanted me to believe. Walked through the rest of the hallway with my back against the wall, flashlight sweeping from floor to ceiling. The silence was unnatural, like the house had been emptied of sound on purpose. I reached the kitchen and turned in a full circle. Nothing. The air, however, felt denser, heavier, as though I had entered a different space entirely. The dripping had stopped, but the damp scent remained, clinging to the curtains, to the wood, to my skin. I kept the flashlight on even after switching on the overhead light. Somehow, its beam felt more honest. Then I noticed something odd. The rug beneath the sink was soaked through. I hadn't spilled anything. I hadn't even stepped into the kitchen since earlier that evening. I knelt and peeled it back slowly. The hardwood beneath was warped and cold to the touch. I pressed, my palm flat against it, and it came back wet, not just damp, dripping, as though water had seeped up from beneath the house. But that made no sense. There were no pipes there, no access to plumbing, just foundation. I backed away from the spot and stared at it, uncertain what to think. That's when the back door creaked. Not the lock, not the knob, just the old wood, shifting slightly in its frame. The kind of sound that comes when someone leans gently against a door, pressing just enough weight to disturb it. My flashlight flicked once. I aimed it at the door. Nothing moved. But the brass bell I had tied to the knob gave a tiny chime, high and delicate, like glass cracking under pressure. I didn't wait. I pushed the refrigerator in front of the door, heart racing, breath sharp in my chest. I couldn't handle another encounter like the Umbrella Man. Not tonight. I grabbed my journal from the living room and sat in the hallway again, knees to chest, flashlight beside me. For hours I wrote. Everything I had seen, every sound, every feeling. The page grew damp from my hands, but I didn't stop. I had to keep track. I had to remember. Because it was getting harder to tell what was memory and what was dream. Around 3:17 a.m., I heard footsteps again. But this time, they didn't come from downstairs. They were above me, in the attic. The same steady, wet rhythm. Drip, step, drip, step. I froze. The attic had no plumbing, no vents, no reason for water to gather. And yet, the sound continued, slow and deliberate, as though something had moved from the basement to the roof, exploring my home one level at a time. Closer, closer to where I slept. I stayed absolutely still, eyes fixed on the ceiling above the staircase. Each step overhead sent a small vibration through the walls, like a heartbeat echoing from the attic itself. The sound was deliberate, slow, as though whoever or whatever was up there wanted me to hear. I wanted to believe it was just the storm, wind shifting in the rafters. But deep down, I knew better. These weren't random creaks. These were footsteps, and they knew I was listening. I climbed the stairs slowly, flashlight held tight, trying not to let the wood groan beneath my weight. At the top of the landing was the pull-down hatch to the attic. I had only opened it once when I moved in, long enough to see dust, cobwebs, and broken insulation. I hadn't gone up since. I stared at the cord hanging down, swinging slightly, in the stale air. I waited. The footsteps had stopped. The silence was worse than the noise. It made me wonder if something was waiting on the other side of that door for me to move. I didn't open the attic that night. Instead, I returned to my bedroom, shoved a dresser in front of the door, and sat on the bed with the journal clutched against my chest. The rain outside grew softer, like a whisper now. A steady, secret language. I began to realize something horrifying. This wasn't just a haunting. This wasn't some ghost drifting through my walls. It was learning me, studying my patterns, testing the structure of the house like it was searching for the most vulnerable point. At some point near dawn, I must have fallen asleep sitting up. When I opened my eyes, the house was quiet again. No rain, no sounds, just light bleeding in through the curtains. But the floor was damp again, wet footprints leading from the hallway to the edge of my bed. I followed them, heart in my throat, until they stopped, directly in front of where I had been sitting. Whoever had made them had stood there, silently, watching me sleep. I didn't scream. I couldn't. I just collapsed to my knees. Later, I cleaned the floor with shaking hands, trying not to look at the shape of the prints, trying not to notice how each one was slightly more human than the last, less distorted, more deliberate, like something was practicing. Like it was getting better at being here. I opened every window in the house that day, desperate for light, for wind, for proof that the outside world still existed. But nothing helped, because no matter how far I threw those windows open, I couldn't shake the feeling that something inside had already found a way in. I spent most of the day downstairs, avoiding every mirror, every window. I didn't want to see myself, or worse, see something standing behind me. The house felt heavier now, like it was holding its breath. I turned on every light, played music just loud enough to mask the silence, but not loud enough to miss a sound. It was a fragile balance. I moved room to room like prey in a hunter's territory, never letting my back face the dark for too long. That evening, as the sky grew darker once more, I noticed something new. On the wall above the staircase, bare drywall I hadn't touched. Since moving in, there was a faint smear. At first, I thought it was dust, or maybe mold. But when I leaned closer, I saw what it really was. A handprint, small, wet, and upside down, as if someone had placed it there while dangling from the ceiling. I stood frozen, trying to rationalize the impossible. But there it was, real, damp, fresh. I ran my fingers near the print but didn't touch it. I wanted to, but I couldn't. It wasn't just moisture, it was intention. That hand had been placed there for me to find. A message. I was here. I am here. I backed away slowly, step by trembling step, not daring to take my eyes off the wall. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't even pretend to. I stayed on the couch, lights on, the journal open in my lap. Writing helped me breathe, helped me remember I was still me. Around 4 a.m., just before the light changed outside, I heard the dripping again. Not upstairs, not in the kitchen, but from the hallway closet just a few feet behind me. I didn't move. I didn't turn. I only listened as a single droplet fell onto the wooden floor, followed by another, then silence. I counted the seconds until daylight, and when the sun finally rose, I gathered my things, opened that closet door, and found nothing. No water, no footprints, just the faint scent of rain and something else, older, but tucked into the corner, barely visible behind a shoebox, was the umbrella, closed, dry, waiting. And next to it, resting gently on the floor, was the button. The voice came with the thunder. Not loud, never loud, but unmistakable. A whisper layered beneath the wind, slipping through the cracks in the windows and beneath the door. It wasn't calling my name, not at first. It spoke in fragments, broken syllables that made no sense but felt familiar. I sat up in bed, listening as rain struck the house like a steady drumbeat. Somewhere within that rhythm, the voice weaved in and out, low, patient, repeating, waiting. I thought I was imagining it. I turned on the bedside lamp, hoping light would silence it. But it didn't. If anything, it became clearer. I moved through the house, barefoot on cold floors, following the sound. The storm had grown stronger. Rain lashed the windows, and wind moaned through the eaves. But underneath it all, that voice persisted. I paused near the back window and pressed my ear to the glass, a soft breath, a whisper. My name. It wasn't just a sound. It knew me. The way it said my name wasn't human. It stretched the syllables too long, like it was savoring them, or remembering them. I stumbled back, hand over my mouth, eyes wide, with disbelief. I hadn't told anyone I was here. I hadn't said my name aloud in days. And yet, the voice knew. I grabbed my phone and hit record. I had to capture it, proof that I wasn't losing my mind. I stood by the window again, hit record, and listened. The voice didn't repeat. The whisper was gone. Only the sound of rain and distant thunder remained. I replayed the audio. Nothing. Just static and wind. My pulse slowed, but the unease grew deeper. It was as if the voice wanted me to try, wanted to prove it could choose when and how to be heard, that I had no control. I sat on the floor, back against the wall, and played the clip again. That's when I heard it. Faint. Almost lost in the static. Just 2 words. Let me. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I stayed in the corner of the room, lights on, watching the windows and waiting for the voice to return. It never did. But the silence that followed was worse. It felt like being left alone by choice, like something had turned away for now, but not for good. And when dawn finally arrived, it brought no comfort, because I knew the voice wasn't finished. It was just beginning to speak. I avoided the windows all morning. Every curtain remained closed, every lock double-checked. I didn't want to hear anything, not even the rain. But the storm lingered, soft and steady, a constant pressure against the outside of the house. I walked room to room in silence, feeling watched even when I wasn't looking. The button was gone again. The umbrella, too. I didn't ask where they had gone this time. I had learned enough to know that answers came with consequences. Around noon, I opened the voice recording again, hoping, against logic, that the message had changed. It hadn't. The same faint, "let me," sat buried in static, barely audible. But something about the way it echoed made me feel like it wasn't just a recording, like the voice had gotten into the phone, into the house, into me. I deleted the file, shut the phone off completely. But deep down, I knew it didn't matter. The voice didn't need devices. It only needed opportunity. I tried reading, but the words blurred. I tried music, but the lyrics twisted strangely in my ears, like they were bending to match the whisper I'd heard. At one point, I turned on the TV and flipped to a random channel. An old black and white movie with no sound. Just flickering images. But I swear the characters moved their mouths in sync with the words I'd heard the night before. I turned it off immediately, heart racing. The house was becoming part of it. Or maybe I was. That night, the storm worsened. The wind pushed against the walls like it wanted in. Every floorboard creaked. Every window hummed. I sat in the hallway with my journal open, trying to capture what I was feeling, but the words came out wrong. I wrote sentences I didn't remember thinking. Pages filled with phrases like, "I see you," and "the door is thin." I stared at the writing, certain it was mine. But the handwriting, though similar, was slightly off. Tighter. Sharper. Like it belonged to someone watching over my shoulder. Then the voice returned. Not from outside, not from the attic or the basement. From inside the room, no source, no direction. Just a clear whisper, right behind my ear. "You left the door open." I screamed, spun around. Nothing. No one. But my body was already reacting. Legs moving on their own, running to every door in the house. I checked them all. Every lock. Every bolt, every window, all closed, all sealed. And yet, the voice was right. Something had already entered. I backed into the living room, heart pounding, every shadow stretching longer than it should. The storm was relentless outside, but in here, it was the silence between raindrops that terrified me. I curled up on the floor beside the couch, flashlight in one hand, journal in the other. I tried to write again. Something normal. Something real. But the pen moved faster than I meant it to. My hand trembled, and I watched in horror as it wrote a single word across the page. Listen. I dropped the pen, my pulse racing. The room was dim, the lamps flickering as if reacting to something unseen. I thought of leaving the house, running into the storm, into the trees, anywhere but here. But I didn't. I couldn't. Something about the rain felt magnetic now, like if I stepped outside, I would vanish, dissolve. I sat frozen, eyes fixed on the page as if it might start writing again. And then, it did. Slowly. One letter at a time. The pen lifted and dropped on its own. He's coming. The power went out just after the final letter. The light died with a soft hiss, and the only sound was the rain, now pounding against the roof like fists. I fumbled with the flashlight, the beam slicing through the dark, revealing nothing but corners and walls and silence. I pressed my back against the wall, clutching the journal, the pen, the only evidence that I wasn't alone in this house. My breathing was loud, too loud. And then the floor creaked, not from above, not from below, right next to me. I turned the flashlight slowly, and the beam caught a figure, just for a second. A reflection, a shadow. It was gone before I could focus. But it had been there. I knew it. I screamed, but no sound came out. My body refused to obey. I stood slowly, legs stiff, and back toward the front door. My fingers grazed the knob, but I didn't turn it. I already knew it wouldn't open. Not tonight. Something was in the house now, and it wanted me to stay. Then the voice returned, stronger this time. Not a whisper. A murmur, clear and deliberate, spoken as if from inside, my own head. "You invited me." I shook my head, denying it, whispering no over and over. But the truth sank in. I had listened. I had answered. I had let it speak. And in doing so, I had opened something I couldn't close. I backed into the hallway, flashlight shaking in my grip. My reflection caught in the mirror beside the staircase. But something was wrong. The movement didn't match mine. For a moment, it hesitated, still, while I stepped forward. Then it moved. Just slightly, as if it were correcting itself. I turned away, heart slamming against my ribs, refusing to look again. The voice had found a way in. Through glass. Through silence. Through me. In the kitchen, the flashlight flickered once, then steadied. On the table lay the journal, open again, though I was sure I had left it shut. Across the pages were more words now, scribbled hastily in a hand that mimicked mine too closely. "We are closer when it rains." Beneath it, scrawled in darker ink, "Rain is memory. You are the storm." I slammed it shut, chest heaving, and dropped it to the floor like it might bite. I fled to the bathroom, turned on the faucet, splashed cold water on my face. The mirror fogged almost instantly, though the room wasn't hot. As I wiped the condensation away, I saw something scribbled into the corner of the glass. Letters I hadn't written. Backwards, barely legible, traced by a finger from inside the mirror. "He speaks your name in the rain." My knees buckled, and I sank to the floor. I didn't cry. I just stared at the writing until it faded into mist. I stayed on that floor for what felt like hours. I listened to the water run. I listened to the house breathe. Outside, the rain fell harder, steady and unstoppable. But this time, I didn't hear the voice. I heard humming. A low, tuneless hum, like a song without words, drifting from the hallway just beyond the door. It was soft, childlike, familiar in a way that chilled me. Something was on the other side, and it was waiting for me to open the door. I turned off the water. I stood, slowly, my hand on the knob, breath caught between fear and inevitability. The humming stopped the moment I touched the door. Silence returned, deep and swallowing. But the message had been delivered. It didn't need to speak anymore. I had already heard it. And I knew there would be no more warnings, only visits. I had stopped asking why. The rain no longer brought surprise. It brought expectation. By now, I knew the pattern. Daylight would offer thin comfort. Dusk would thicken the air. And by nightfall, the house would change. It always did. I prepared for it mechanically, checking locks, drawing curtains, lighting candles in case the power failed again. But it wasn't about light anymore. It was about boundaries. And mine were wearing thin. That night, the storm began just after 10. The thunder was distant, but the rain came down heavy, pooling against the windows like hands pressing from outside. I was in the bedroom, sitting on the edge of the bed, flashlight in my lap, journal untouched. I didn't write anymore. I couldn't. Every time I tried, the pen seemed to resist me, as if the words weren't mine to control. Instead, I sat and listened to the creaks, the sighs, the faint breathing that came from walls that shouldn't breathe. I turned off the lamp. The room went dim, lit only by the occasional flicker of lightning across the curtains. I thought, if I didn't move, it wouldn't come. If I stayed silent, it might pass. But when the temperature dropped, suddenly, sharply, I knew it had arrived. The air grew wet, thick. Every sound in the house hushed. And then I felt it. Not heard. Felt. A presence. Heavy and quiet, like gravity had shifted. Like something was standing behind me. I didn't turn right away. I couldn't. My body refused. My eyes fixed on the shadow cast by the dresser, on the rippling reflection of the curtain in the glass. But I could feel it. Closer. Closer. The floor beneath my feet creaked. And then, with unbearable slowness, the edge of the bed dipped. Just slightly, just enough to know I wasn't alone. Something had sat down beside me. Still, I didn't move. I stared straight ahead, heart frozen in my chest. The weight beside me didn't shift, didn't breathe. It only sat, watching, waiting. And then I felt it. Cold fingers brushing against my arm. Light, barely there, but unmistakably real. I gasped. Not from fear, but from recognition. Because the touch wasn't violent. It was familiar. And that terrified me more than anything else. I turned my head slowly, eyes wide, breath caught somewhere between scream and silence. But there was nothing there. The bed was sunken beside me, the sheet gently indented, but no form, no face, just space where something unseen had made itself known. I reached out with trembling fingers, hovering over the dip in the mattress. The air was icy cold. I could feel the shape of something I couldn't see. My hand passed through it, and yet I felt it. Resistance, presence, intention. The room pulsed with quiet. The storm outside seemed to fade, muffled as if submerged underwater. I sat frozen, too afraid to move, too entranced to flee. The presence remained beside me, unmoving, but now I could hear it. Faint breathing, slow and steady, in perfect rhythm with mine. As if it were mimicking me, or trying to remember how. I whispered into the dark. "What do you want?" No reply. Only the breath, the weight, and the overwhelming sense of being studied. Then, slowly, the weight lifted. The mattress rose ever so slightly. The air warmed just a fraction, and the pressure in the room loosened. The presence was retreating, not leaving, just receding, as if it had seen enough, as if it had touched enough. I didn't follow. I didn't want to know where it went. I sat there long after it was gone, staring at the space it had occupied, wondering if some part of it had stayed behind in me. Later, when I could move again, I went to the bathroom and stared at myself in the mirror. I looked different. Not older. Not frightened. Just thinner. As if something had been taken from me while I wasn't looking. My eyes looked darker somehow. More hollow. I turned away quickly, flicking the light off. but as I stepped back into the hall, I heard a sound from the bedroom. The slow pull of a drawer sliding open. I hadn't touched anything. I returned to the room cautiously, heart hammering in my ears. The top drawer of the dresser was open. Inside was the journal I had left on the living room floor 2 nights earlier. I hadn't brought it here. And yet, there it was, lying open. A single line written across the page in handwriting not mine. I remember you. I stepped back from the dresser, pulse surging through my limbs like electricity. I didn't know what the words meant. I remember you. Had we met before? Had it been in this house? Another life? Another dream? I shook my head, rejecting the thought, but it clung to me like wet fabric. I closed the drawer slowly, almost gently, afraid that slamming it might stir something. The room was too quiet, again, thick with meaning I didn't yet understand. For the rest of the night, I didn't leave the room. I sat against the far wall, flashlight flickering in my lap, the journal still open in front of me. The line stared up at me like an open eye. I tried writing beneath it, tried asking questions. Who are you? What do you want from me? But each time I finished a sentence, the words slowly faded, absorbed into the page as if the book itself refused them. Only its words remained, only its voice. By morning, the rain had lightened, but never stopped. The house felt altered, as if the rooms had shifted slightly in their foundations, just enough to make you doubt your memory. Doors opened slower, steps echoed longer, and the mirrors, every mirror, had fogged over completely, even with no heat, no steam. I left them covered with towels. I no longer trusted reflections, not since they had started hesitating before following me. I walked through the house carefully, observing everything as if I were a guest in someone else's home. Nothing was out of place, but nothing was right either. The angles felt wrong, the corners too deep, and every now and then I would hear that breath again, not in my ear, not behind the door, but inside the walls, like the house had developed lungs, like it had begun breathing with me, for me, or perhaps in place of me. Around noon, I opened the closet in the hallway to grab a blanket. When I pulled it free, something dropped onto the floor with a soft thud. I froze, then slowly bent to pick it up. It was a photograph, black and white, old, creased at the edges, a picture of the house, but not as it is now. The porch was different. The trees were younger, and in the window of the upper floor, a figure stood watching, a woman, pale, expressionless, but unmistakably me. I stared at the photograph for a long time, my fingers trembling along its edges. The image was grainy, but there was no mistaking the outline of my face, my hair, my eyes. But the picture was old, decades at least. The photo paper yellowed, curling at the corners like it had been hidden a very long time. I flipped it over. On the back, in faded pencil, someone had written, "She always comes back." I dropped it as if it burned. The floor beneath me felt softer than before, like it was no longer entirely solid. I sat down slowly, back against the wall, the photo on the floor in front of me. I whispered, "Who am I?" To no one, to the house, to the voice, to whatever memory had been sealed in wood and rain. But I knew the answer wouldn't come in words. It would come in nights, in storms, in silence, and it had already begun. That evening, the rain returned in sheets. I didn't check the windows. I didn't light the candles. I simply waited, sitting in the bedroom in total darkness, eyes wide open. The air shifted the moment the sun vanished. And I felt it again, the weight at the edge of the bed, the breath beside mine. A hand, colder than death, resting gently on my shoulder. And then, for the first time, I didn't flinch. I turned slowly. The figure was there, faint, transparent. A woman with hollow eyes and wet hair clinging to her face. She didn't speak. She only tilted her head, studying me, as if waiting to be remembered. And then she stepped forward, and I didn't back away. Because somewhere, deep within me, I already knew her. Her face, her grief, her story. And I understood. She wasn't the visitor I was. The morning after I saw her, the rain had stopped, but the air still tasted like metal. Everything was damp, inside and out. I stood on the porch for the first time in days, wrapped in a coat that didn't feel like mine, staring across the street, at the neighbor's house. The same man who once asked, "You saw it, didn't you?" He hadn't been outside since. Neither had anyone else. The neighborhood was silent, too silent, as if it too had seen something it couldn't name. I stepped off the porch and crossed the street, the gravel soft beneath my boots. The curtains in his front window were open, but the interior was dark. I hesitated at the door, hand raised, unsure if I was knocking for help or for forgiveness. I finally tapped twice, then stepped back. Moments passed. Then, the door creaked open. He stood there, older than I remembered, eyes sunken, skin pale. His expression didn't change when he saw me. "You came too late," he said, and turned, away, leaving the door open behind him. I followed him inside. The house smelled like dust and damp paper. Old photographs lined the hallway. Some faded beyond recognition, others eerily sharp. All of them featured the same house. Mine. Seasons changed. People changed. But the house remained constant. In one photo, a young girl stood in the rain on the porch, holding a black umbrella. Her face was half hidden, but I felt something twist in my stomach. I recognized the shape of her eyes. In the living room, he sat down heavily in a worn armchair, never gesturing for me to sit. "They come when the house calls them," he said, eyes fixed on the fireplace. "But the house doesn't call just anyone. It remembers, and sometimes it brings pieces back." I didn't understand. "What do you mean, pieces?" I asked. He turned toward me then, something fragile in his voice. "You've been there, before. Haven't you felt it? In the walls, in the mirrors? That house isn't haunted, it's repeating." I felt sick. I wanted to run, but I didn't. "How do I stop it?" I asked, barely above a whisper. He shook his head slowly. "You don't stop it. You finish it, or you join it." I sat down. My legs could no longer hold me. He reached beside the chair and pulled out an old book, thick, leather-bound, stained by age and something darker. "It's all written," he said. "Names, dates, visitors, hosts. You're not the first, but you might be the last." I took the book with hesitant hands. It was heavier than I expected. Cold, even in the warm air of his living room. I opened it slowly, each page filled with meticulous handwriting. Some pages neat and deliberate, others frantic and smudged. The dates stretched back more than a century. Some names were crossed out. Others had notes beside them. Did not leave. Spoke to the voice. Opened the door. And then I saw my own name, written plainly. No date. Just a single word beneath. Not returned. "I never wrote that," I whispered. He didn't respond. I turned more pages. There were sketches, symbols, diagrams of the house. But the floor plans were wrong. Shifting layouts, staircases that led nowhere, rooms I had never seen. One entry read, "Third stair from the top, hollow." Another, "Don't sleep in the north-facing room more than twice." I felt dizzy, like I was reading memories that weren't mine but belonged to the house, and the house had remembered them for me. He stood and walked toward the window. "Some people leave," he said quietly. "But they always come back in pieces. Not in body, in echoes, dreams. They think they're new. They think they've found the house. But it's the other way around." I clutched the book tighter. "What does it want from me?" I asked. "It doesn't want anything," he said. "It just wants you, because it already knows you. It always did." He turned then, slowly, like every word had drained the strength from him. "You have to choose," he said, "before the storm comes back. You stay and finish what began, or you leave and carry it with you forever." I stood, legs trembling. "What happens if I stay?" He looked me in the eyes for the first time. "You find out how it ends." The wind outside shifted. A pressure drop. I could feel it. The rain was returning. As I left the house, the sky was already darkening. I held the book close to my chest, my fingers digging into the leather like it might slip away. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't look back. Because I knew, somehow, that when I crossed the road and stepped back onto my porch, the neighbor would be gone. The house would vanish. Or maybe it never existed. Maybe it was just another memory the rain had rewritten. I crossed the threshold of my house as the first drops of rain returned. The book in my hands pulsed with a cold that seeped into my skin, into my ribs. I locked the door behind me, but it felt hollow, like locking a door inside a dream. The walls of the house groaned softly, not from the weather, but from something deeper. Recognition. It knew I was back, not just physically but fully. I had brought the book. I had brought its history home. I placed the book on the dining table and stood over it, unsure if I was meant to read more or simply be near it. Pages fluttered on their own, stopping somewhere in the middle. An old photograph had been tucked between them, this time not of the house, but of the forest behind it. In the clearing, a group of people stood in a circle, hands joined. Ritual? Reunion? I couldn't tell, but my eyes locked on one figure near the center. Her face was clearer than the others, and it was mine. I stumbled back, knocking over the chair. My breath caught in my throat. How? I had never been there. And yet, there I was, surrounded by strangers, standing in a ritual I couldn't remember. Or maybe I had remembered it. Through dreams, through that hum in the walls, through the voice that called my name in the rain. I picked up the photo again, turned it over. Written on the back, "The circle returns when the door is open." I didn't know what door it meant, or if I'd already opened it. That night, I sat on the porch in the rain for the first time. I didn't hide. I didn't shut the curtains. I let it fall on my skin, cold and electric. I waited, the book in my lap, the forest just beyond the edge of the light. I thought of running again, but to where? I understood now. It wouldn't matter where I went. The house wasn't just a place. It was a loop, a rhythm, a memory that rewrote itself in water and wood and shadow. And as I sat there, the voice returned. Not outside, not behind me, but inside me, whispering not in words, but in knowing. I wasn't here to escape it. I was here to complete it. The visits hadn't been intrusions. They had been invitations. The umbrella man, the dripping footsteps, the voice in the rain. Each one a chapter I had lived before. Each one part of a story I was finally beginning to remember. I brought the book back inside and placed it on the floor of the attic, the one place I had always avoided. The house seemed to breathe deeper as I climbed the stairs, each step softer than before. At the top, I didn't turn on the light. I didn't need it. The space welcomed me now. The dust no longer stirred. The shadows no longer resisted. It was warm in a way that should have frightened me, but didn't. Like returning to a place I had built in a forgotten part of myself. I sat cross-legged in the center of the attic, the book in my lap, rain thundering softly above me. I opened to a blank page and wrote my name. For the first time, the ink didn't fade. It soaked deep into the parchment, anchoring me to everything that had come before. Below my name, I wrote a single line. I remember the storm. And with that, the attic exhaled. A long, slow breath, as if it had been waiting for that moment to rest. Behind me, I heard soft footsteps, bare, wet, slow. But I didn't turn. I knew who it was, or rather what it was. A reflection of me, a version, a memory that had stepped out of the wall to become real again. I felt its presence sit beside me, not hostile, not friendly, just inevitable. Like the rain, like the night, like the pull of a house that never forgets those who once belonged to it. Lightning flashed through the cracks in the wooden frame, illuminating the room for just a breath of time. In that moment, I saw them. Figures standing in the attics, corners, silent and still. Past visitors, echoes, maybe future versions of me. Their faces held no malice, only understanding. The understanding that this was not a haunting. It was a return, a ritual, a memory, not of one life, but many, looping through time like rain against the same old glass. And as the thunder rolled and the voice rose once more, not in fear but in song, I closed the book, placed it on the floorboards, and whispered into the dark, "I'm home." The storm arrived before sunset. No warning, no wind, just a sudden wall of rain that swallowed the sky. I was already waiting. The attic floor beneath me had gone warm, pulsing faintly, like a heartbeat buried beneath the wood. I hadn't left the house all day. I couldn't. The book remained where I left it, unopened since the last name was written. But something had changed. I could feel it. The house no longer watched me with suspicion. It had begun to guide me. In the corner of the attic, beneath a loose panel, I found them. Papers older than the walls themselves. Ink faded but legible. Symbols I recognized but couldn't read. Diagrams, circles, instructions scrawled in broken Latin. I spread them across the floor in silence, heart steady, hands calm. I didn't understand every word, but I didn't need to. The language of the house was older than speech. It spoke in repetition, in water, in return. One phrase was repeated across 3 different pages, in 3 different hands. Open the way and become the rain. I traced it with my finger, each letter familiar now. I saw sketches of the house with certain rooms circled, symbols, etched into corners of windows, a map of the forest with a spot marked clearing. I didn't remember drawing them, but I remembered being them, like memories passed down through ink instead of blood. As the rain intensified, I moved through the house, following the markings. I lit candles where the diagrams instructed. I placed the button, the photograph, and the bell on the floor in the center of the living room. Each item hummed faintly when I touched them. Charged, alive, waiting. The umbrella I placed last, upright, facing the door, the same way he once left it for me. I didn't cry. I didn't shiver. The fear was gone now, replaced by a strange, aching clarity. I was no longer haunted. I was chosen. And when the last candle was lit, the house sighed, not from its walls, but from beneath. A deep, wet sound like earth shifting under stone. The lights flickered once. The journal on the table opened itself to a blank page, and the whispers returned, not as fragments, but a chorus. Hundreds of voices, layered and soft, chanting something I couldn't understand, but that my body did. I knelt on the floor, placed my palms flat, and waited for the ritual to begin. The candle flames bent inward, drawn not by wind, but by some invisible pull at the center of the room. I watched as the shadows stretched toward me, elongated fingers reaching from walls and corners. The button on the floor began to spin slowly on its own axis, silent and smooth. The bell rang once, clear and sharp, then went still. I could feel something descending, not from above, but through me, like water sinking into soil. My eyes closed without my command. In the darkness behind my lids, I saw the house, not as it was, but as it had been, as it had always been, shifting, breathing. Rooms folding into themselves, faces passing through halls, the same faces. My face. I saw myself at different ages, different clothes, different names, but always here. Always in the storm, always returning. I opened my eyes and found tears running down my cheeks. Not from fear, from memory. The floor beneath me throbbed. A low vibration climbed my spine, steady as breath. My fingers began to trace the symbols from the pages, unbidden, fluent. Circles within circles, lines crossing over familiar points on the floor. I whispered phrases I didn't know I knew. The rain outside had become a roar, not deafening but containing, as if the world beyond the house no longer existed. Only this space, only this moment, only this story. Finally remembering itself. Then I heard footsteps upstairs, not heavy, not wet. Bare feet across the attic floor, slow and even. I didn't panic. I didn't move. I only listened. The steps reached the top of the stairs and stopped. Silence stretched for what felt like minutes. Then the voice, calm, layered, not one voice but many, spoke from the dark. "Are you ready?" I stood, slowly. Candlelight danced across the windows, and the house seemed to pulse with breath. I whispered, "Yes." And as I spoke, the windows unlatched themselves with a soft click. Rain poured in, not in streams, but in vapor. A mist that moved like memory, curling around my ankles, filling the room. The flames extinguished one by one. But the room did not dim. Instead, it brightened with a soft internal glow. Light without source. Warmth without heat. I stepped into the mist, the house exhaling once more, and the ritual began in earnest. The mist thickened but never blinded me. Instead, it clarified. Every object in the room took on a glow, faint outlines shifting with unseen energy. The journal hovered slightly off the table, pages fluttering. The photographs on the wall, once silent, now whispered as I passed, the voices of those they captured reaching out with soft fragments. Don't forget. We remember. You've been here before. My feet moved without command, tracing a path drawn long before I arrived. I found myself standing before the front door, though I hadn't meant to go there. The umbrella beside it had vanished again. In its place, the button lay on the floor, pulsing gently like a small black heart. I bent to pick it up. As my fingers closed around it, a wave of sensation rushed through me. Memories not my own. Faces crying in storms, laughter under broken ceilings, hands clutching the same journal in desperation. All moments held within this structure. All moments now alive inside me. I opened the front door. Rain swept across the threshold in a soft rush, but I didn't flinch. The air outside had changed. No thunder, no wind. Just the rhythmic falling of rain, like a metronome marking time. The forest beyond the yard seemed closer, taller. The trees bent slightly, as if leaning in to listen. In the center of the path, directly aligned with the doorway, a circle of stones had formed. I hadn't placed them, but they were waiting. I stepped out barefoot, the ground cool and firm. The moment I crossed the boundary of the house, the air thickened, heavier, but not suffocating, sacred. The voices followed, rising softly around me. Some I recognized, others I didn't. But all of them spoke in unison as I reached the circle. Begin where it ended, end where it began. I knelt in the center. The rain did not touch me. It curved around the space like an unseen dome. Time slowed. And from the trees they came. Figures wrapped in shadow and rain, not walking but arriving. Each one stopped at the edge of the circle, watching, a gathering of memories, of echoes. I wasn't afraid. They weren't there to harm me. They were there to witness. The ritual was not just a summoning. It was a merging, a surrender. The storm wasn't the danger. It was the vessel. And now, it asked only one question. Will you stay? I didn't speak. I didn't need to. My presence was the answer. The rain shifted, falling in reverse for a brief moment, upward, skyward, like breath being drawn back into ancient lungs. The stone beneath my knees warmed. A ripple spread outward from the center of the circle, touching each figure that surrounded me, and as it did, I saw their faces. Some were strangers. Some were me. All of them wore the same expression, peace carved from surrender. I placed the button in the center of the circle. It sank slowly into the earth, vanishing without resistance. The bell followed, then the photograph. Each object accepted as if the storm had waited decades to reclaim them. When the last item disappeared, the ground beneath me vibrated once, not violently, like a heart confirming a beat, like the house saying, yes. The trees bowed, the rain stilled, and in that moment, I felt everything. Every visitor, every story, every whisper carved into the walls, every footprint, every knock. The house wasn't a prison, it was a vessel for remembering. A memory machine powered by storms. And now, it was full. I stood slowly, the mist around me rising in gentle spirals. The figures began to fade, dissolving into rain, returning to whatever place they had been held. But I remained. Not because I was trapped, but because I had become part of it. I walked back to the house as the rain resumed, light and steady. The door was open. The attic light was on. The book sat waiting on the stairs, open to a fresh page. I sat at the kitchen table and began to write, not as a warning, not as a plea, but as a continuation. My handwriting filled the page, steady and calm. I didn't write about fear. I wrote about patterns, about cycles, about return. Because someone, someday, would come looking, and the house would remember. And when they did, they would find my name, my voice, my story, written in the rain, whispered through the walls. And they would ask, as I once had, who was the first? But the truth was simple and endless. There was no first. There was no last. Only the storm, and those who choose to stay within it. The final storm didn't begin with thunder. It began with silence. A silence so thick it filled the space between heartbeats, between thoughts. I knew it had arrived, not as a threat, but as a guest. The house was calm. Every board, every window, every shadow had settled. I lit no candles. I made no preparations. I simply walked barefoot from room to room, touching the walls, the doorknobs, the glass. The house didn't resist me anymore. It welcomed me, finally, as its own. Outside, the sky was a bruise-colored canvas. The wind stirred the trees like breath across skin. And then gently, the first drops began to fall. I sat by the living room window, the journal open on my lap, its last page still blank. The pen hovered above it, waiting for the final line. But I didn't write, not yet, because this wasn't a story that ended in ink. It ended in feeling, in presence, in the soft creak of a stair, the cool kiss of mist beneath the door, the warmth of a memory stepping through the frame. I stood and opened the front door. The porch glistened, rain dancing lightly across the wood. I stepped out and felt it coat my skin like a second self. The umbrella was there, upright, closed, waiting. I didn't pick it up. I no longer needed to shield myself from the rain. It was no longer a warning. It was an invitation. One final time, I crossed the yard, barefoot and still, to the edge of the woods. The stones were gone. The circle was complete. There was only the forest, and beyond it, the unknown. The voices did not return that night, nor the shadows, nor the footsteps. The house no longer needed to speak. Everything it had to say had already been given, through the windows, through the dreams, through the pages I had written and the ones that had written me. And now, the choice was no longer mine alone. I was part of something larger, a pattern, too old to trace, too familiar to ignore. I was not haunted. I was remembered. I turned back to the house one last time. Its windows glowed softly in the stormlight, warm like candle-lit eyes. I knew someone else would come. Someday, drawn by the same silence, by the same rain. And they would walk these halls and ask the same questions, and find the same answers. And when they reached the attic, they would find the book, still warm, still breathing, and a final message, written in the smallest, most careful script. You're not alone. I returned inside, closing the door gently behind me. The sound echoed through the house like a heartbeat, slow and steady. I walked through each room without turning on a single light. I knew them all by feel now. I could move through the dark without fear. The walls hummed softly beneath my fingertips, no longer hiding their voice, but singing it, a lullaby made of storm winds and soaked wood, the song of endings, or perhaps the song of returning. Upstairs, the attic door was open, not pulled down, but open, as though the ceiling itself had parted for me. I climbed the steps without hesitation. The book lay in the center of the floor. Around it, the candle wax from nights before had dried into perfect rings, unchanged by time or temperature. I knelt beside the book. My name glowed faintly on the page, pulsing like a resting heartbeat. I placed my hand over it and waited. Don't know how long I stayed there. Minutes? Hours? The concept of time had unraveled like thread. The rain outside no longer came in waves. It was steady, rhythmic, like breath. I listened to it, eyes closed, feeling every drop through the roof, through the walls, through my skin. I was no longer a visitor in this house. I was a part of its structure. A living story bound in water and wood. Not trapped. Not lost. Preserved. When I finally opened my eyes, I was no longer alone. A figure stood across the attic, familiar, though I had never seen her clearly before. She did not move, and neither did I. We simply watched each other, mirrors across time. Her face held no sorrow, only knowing. Behind her, more figures emerged from the wood, the rain, the memory. Each one a chapter, a name, a night. The room was full, yet silent. not with fear, but with reverence. And then I understood. The ritual was not about summoning. It was about witnessing. This place didn't demand sacrifice. It offered remembrance. Those who entered and stayed didn't disappear. They became memory. They became voice. And when the time was right, they would guide the next. A storm may fall on many nights, but the last night only comes once. And when it does, you know it. You feel it in the rain. You feel it in the walls. The figures moved closer, though their feet made no sound. Their faces were calm, some unfamiliar, others almost like mine. I could feel their presence like warmth radiating from old sunlight, stored in the walls. They carried no malice, no judgment, only memory. I stood slowly, and they formed a circle around me, not trapping, but welcoming. I felt my body grow lighter, the house rising around me like breath caught between moments. I knew what came next. The journal opened once more, and this time, I didn't hesitate. I wrote a final line, the only truth I had left. I stayed. The ink sank quickly, accepted without resistance. A hum spread outward from the page, low and resonant, vibrating through the floor, the beams, the sky. The storm paused. For one still moment, everything stopped. No wind, no thunder, no breath. Just stillness, as if the world were watching, and then the attic began to dissolve. Not crumble, not collapse, but fade. The walls became mist. The floor, water. I was no longer inside the house. I was the house. I felt the door downstairs, the window upstairs, the heartbeat of footsteps long, gone and yet to come. I felt the presence of stories waiting to be written. I felt the weight of those who had stayed before me, and those still wandering toward the storm, unknowingly seeking their own ending. In that moment, I heard the doorbell ring. Not loud, just one soft chime. Somewhere, a new visitor had arrived. The rain had called them, and they had answered. And now, they stood on the porch as I once had, wondering if the stories were true. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. The wind moved the curtains. The floor welcomed their step. The storm wrapped itself around them like memory, warm and inevitable. And from the attic, where once I had sat alone, I watched them enter. A new beginning written beneath the last line. A new voice ready to ask, "What is this place?" And the house, as always, would answer without words. Just rain, just silence, just the long, slow rhythm of time remembering itself through those brave enough to listen. The storm never ended after that. Not truly. Sometimes it lessened, fell into a mist whispered against the windows like a lullaby, but it never vanished, because the house no longer needed fair skies. It had become a place between time and weather, a place of echoes, of rituals, of return. Those who passed through never truly left. They became breath in the wood, voices in the pipes, warmth in the candle flame. They became memory, and memory is patient. Years may pass, generations may forget, but when the rain comes again, when the sky darkens just so, and the wind finds its way through an old keyhole, the house remembers. It wakes, it watches, it waits. The door unlocks on its own. The first drop touches the porch. The floor creaks. And another story begins, already written, just waiting to be read. So if one night you find yourself on a quiet road with rain in your hair and no memory of how you arrived, if you see the lights glowing softly from a house that seems to recognize you, don't be afraid. Step forward. Let the door open. Sit by the fire. Listen to the walls. They will know your name, even if you don't yet. And when the time comes, when the last page is blank, and the thunder speaks gently instead of loud, you will understand what all the others have come to know. You were never alone in the storm. You were always part of it. When the house sleeps, time wakes. In the corners, silence stitches memory into damp wood. There are no ghosts here, only echoes with names and breath. The wind hums songs for those never forgotten. And the rain. The rain reads every page you wrote with bare feet. It enters through windows not to soak, but to trace the outlines of lives left behind. Each drop is a fragment of someone who stayed, someone who listened, someone who waited. And when you hear it, without meaning to, the house hears you too. The final candle doesn't go out with time. It fades with understanding, with surrender, with the sigh of someone who chose to stay, not out of fear, but because they realized the door was never locked. It only opened from within. So when it rains, be still. Listen to the sound on the roof, the glass, the floor. If it speaks your name, don't be afraid. You're not being summoned. You're being remembered.